What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. Time to dive into my wide receiver start and sit predictions for Week 8 of the NFL season. Got a lot of matchups to talk about this week, but as always, kicking it off with our percentages from last week. And let me just forewarn you on something, all right? Last week's percentage was not great. But going back and taking a look at it, it wasn't because I was wrong about a lot of the starts I said. It was more on the sit side, just a lot of performances last week that kind of came out of nowhere that people weren't expecting. So here's my percentage from last week, only 59%. Now, obviously, that's not nearly good enough. My goal is at least 70% every single week, and this is the first week in a while now that I haven't had a good percentage at wide receiver. But like I said, I made a lot of really good calls with my starts, just some sits last week that kind of came out of nowhere to do anything. Scotty Miller, Guyton, a couple of them. I made that Nelson Aguilar call though for a second straight week, which was great. So like I said, got some more work to do to get back to it this week, but overall felt pretty good about the calls that I made last week in terms of telling you who to put into your lineup. So let's go ahead and talk about our first matchup of the week, Atlanta and Carolina on Thursday Night Football. Carolina looking to get back to 500 while the Atlanta Falcons look to overcome another heartbreaking loss in the fourth quarter, this time to the Detroit Lions. They're going to go on the road and try to get something done this week. Atlanta, for me, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, both going to be starts for me this week, while Russell Gage is going to be a sit. Julio Jones, he's finally healthy. He's moving forward, looking good the last couple of weeks, which obviously if you spent an early round pick on Julio Jones, you'd love to see that. Calvin Ridley, though, just to kind of keep an eye on it, his last couple of weeks, his yards have been down. Now, he has scored a touchdown in each of the last two performances, but with Julio Jones being healthy, back on the field 100%, and some of the changes they may have made on the offensive side of the ball, just in terms of play calling and things like that, you have to wonder maybe if Calvin Ridley's ceiling is still there that we saw earlier in the season. Again, his yards haven't quite been there the last couple of weeks, but he's still been a good option because he's scoring touchdowns and still getting a decent amount of targets. So instead of looking at a ceiling as a top 5 wide receiver this week, maybe more along the lines of a top 10 going on against Carolina. I will end up having Julio Jones probably ahead of him this week, though, in my rankings. For Carolina, DJ Moore, 93 receiving yards in each of his last 3 games. So a slow start to the season, starting to finally break out of that. And Robbie Anderson, even though that ceiling hasn't really been there the last couple of weeks, he is still the wide receiver 9 on the year, with DJ Moore doing better. So they're right around that wide receiver 9 and wide receiver 13 area right now in half PPR format. So both of these guys doing just fine. You can start moving forward again with DJ Moore on a weekly basis. For those of you that decided to hold on to him, congratulations. Hopefully that move pays off for you moving forward and you will be fine with him in your lineup. But both him and Robbie Anderson in a good matchup are going to be starts for me this week. While Curtis Samuel, who ended up scoring a touchdown last week, kind of catching some people off guard because, that touchdown he scored has been a Mike Davis touchdown the last couple of weeks. Christian McCaffrey probably won't be back this week, but Curtis Samuel is still going to be a sit for me. Even after the touchdown last week, he's far too risky. Pittsburgh and Baltimore is probably going to be one of the best matchups of the week, and I am looking forward to it. For Pittsburgh this week, I am going to go with Juju and Deontay Johnson as starts. Now, Deontay Johnson left his matchup last week with what seemed to be another injury, but based on everything I've heard, he's going to be fine and able to play in Week 8. So Deontay Johnson, is he turning into that Will Fuller 2.0? The guy has just been banged up all season long. It seems like one thing or another where the guy has an injury and has to come off the field and misses a week. He should be back this week, but I kind of look at it as the same way as Will Fuller. If the guy is healthy, you put him in your lineup, and that's what I'm doing with Deontay Johnson. Last week, I did have him as a start. I did list him as a start last week, but for a lot of you that asked questions on him, if you had some better options that were maybe a little bit higher a ceiling, I had you go with them instead, just because I wanted to see him back. I wanted to see him healthy and ready to go, but kind of the same thing with Will Fuller. If he's healthy, put him in your lineup, and you'll just have to deal with the injuries later if they end up coming. Juju's going to come back to being a start for me, though. He does go back to 14 targets last week. And he looks much better when he's got his options on the outside of the field looking healthy in terms of Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and James Washington. If Juju can just focus on playing in the slot, he's a mismatch for a lot of people. It's when he has to kind of move to the outside or he doesn't have that help on the outside, especially on both sides, that it starts to become a little bit of an issue. Chase Claypool, kind of hard to trust him with Deontay Johnson in, and that's the way it's been all season long. If Deontay Johnson is in, Chase Claypool is a guy that is a little bit more boom or bust than he is boom. Last week we saw it. Okay, awful week for Chase Claypool last week. So if Deontay Johnson is in, Chase Claypool is probably going to be a sit for me moving forward. Now, for Baltimore, we're definitely going to be going with Marquise Brown. Why? Because even though when we look at the Steelers defense and we say, man, this is a tough defense, and it is, it's a good defense, they're still allowing 40 plus fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And considering Marquise Brown is really the only wide receiver they're worth starting or even rostering at this point, we're going to have to play him because he should get his, and he should get more than enough from Lamar Jackson in a game that will probably be a little bit more of a back and forth. I mean, you look at these two teams and you think defense, they're going to have to be throwing the ball quite a bit. I don't think these teams are really going to run too well on each other, so they're going to have to be throwing the ball, and Marquise Brown can definitely get his, especially if he were to score a long touchdown. But for Boykin, Duvernay, and Snead, they're all going to be sits for me. The Rams will get to head to Miami and take part in Tua's NFL starting debut. What's that offense going to look like in Miami? Well, I think that's going to really dictate this entire game because for Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, they're both going to be starts for me this week. Both of them still seeing a decent amount of volume, especially Cooper Kupp. You know, Cooper Kupp is still getting a decent amount of volume, just not nearly as many big plays and as many touchdowns as we're used to, and that's kind of keeping his fantasy value down right now. But this week, what's going to happen with the Miami offense? Are they going to be able to move the ball? Are they going to be comfortable with Tua in the backfield? Is Tua going to be comfortable? He's been out for a while now, and he didn't get any type of preseason or anything. He's largely been working with the twos. What's going to happen with Tua? Is he going to be on his game and able to move the football? If they can, and Miami can keep up with the Rams, then Kupp and Wood should end up seeing more than enough volume to be starts this week. But if they get out in front of Miami early, Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, both of their ceilings could be very, very limited this week. And I think you're going to see that in my rankings as I kind of have them a little bit on the lower side. Jefferson and Reynolds are both going to be starts for me. But what's going to happen with Miami? Well, here's my concern, okay? So the Rams are giving up less than 30 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. In fact, they're giving up the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And now they're getting a quarterback that hasn't started a football game in almost a year, maybe even a little bit less than that. Hasn't had any preseason, hasn't really had a chance to work except for in practice, and hasn't really ran with the ones that much because Fitzpatrick has been doing it. So are we concerned? Heck yeah, we're concerned. Devontae Parker gets Jalen Ramsey this week. I don't know if I can start Parker. Parker's numbers are there so far this season, but with everything considered, can we really trust him? Now, I might have him low-end wide receiver 3 just within my top 30 just because he could end up seeing enough volume, but he's going to be a sit for me this week just because of all of the concerns around that. Do they set Tua up for success? Do they have him throw some of the short to intermediate routes? If they do, does that mean Isaiah Ford maybe gets a little bit more of the looks? Preston Williams, is he a guy? He started to look a little bit better with Fitzpatrick over the last couple of weeks before the bye. Does he get going a little bit more now? Is it going to be Mike Gesicki? It's hard to tell at this point. Me personally, I think we see a lot of the running game and we see a lot of those short to intermediate passes. We see them trying to work to it in slowly. They don't care about losing, to be honest with you, because if they did, they would still have Fitzpatrick in there because he's the best option for them right now. But they want to get Tua in there. They want to get him evaluated. And part of that process is setting him up for success. I think we're going to see that, and that's going to cap a lot of fantasy expectations this week. Our next matchup is the Jets and the Chiefs. And for the New York Jets, they're like 19.5-point underdogs right now, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. The one thing that we know that's going to happen, they're going to have to throw the ball, right? I mean, they're going to have to play catch up basically the entire game. I would imagine that 19.5-point spread is going to be pretty close. So with Jamison Crowder and Denzel Mims, they're the two that I'm focusing on this week. Jamison Crowder, I hope he plays. If he does, we're absolutely going to play Jamison Crowder. He's a top 5 wide receiver this year based on points per game alone. So well, he's getting more than enough volume for him to be a start for us this week going up against Kansas City, knowing they're going to have to throw the ball an awful lot. Brashard Perryman, he's going to end up being out this week more than likely. Dude got absolutely rocked last week. I don't know if he makes it back this week. We will keep an eye on that and see. So Denzel Mims at that point will become a start for me. I kind of like him on the outside this week. First game back last week and looked good. He is an athlete. He's definitely a guy that can win some routes. Because of how much they're going to have to throw it this week, I am going to list him as a start. Now for Kansas City. The thing about Kansas City is we know that they're going to put up points, right? How are they going to put up those points? And how quickly are they going to put up those points? So for me, Tyreek Hill is definitely going to be a start, right? If you own Tyreek Hill, you start him every single week. You know, one big play in the first half, a touchdown, and we're good with that, right? Sammy Watkins injured. He's out more than likely this week. So it comes down to Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson. I kind of feel a Mecole Hardman week coming on here really soon. However, this could end up being out of control, and it's a Le'Veon Bell revenge game. They could hand the ball off to Bell 30 times this week and let him go absolutely wild against the Jets and get some revenge based on how he was treated there over the last couple of years dealing with that mess of a team. So there's just probably not going to be enough for everyone to go around this week. And obviously you factor in Travis Kelce in the passing game as well. There's not enough for Hardman and Robinson. So Tyreek Hill, yes, 100% a start, just like every single week. But for Hardman and Robinson, we're going to skip on them because the volume just doesn't seem to be there this week. Divisional matchup with Minnesota and Green Bay this week. And Adam Thielen absolutely torched the Green Bay Packers in week 1. So we're going to go ahead and list him as a start again this week. However, I am going to list Justin Jefferson as a sit because what I foresee happening is Justin Jefferson is going to get the Jair Alexander treatment this week. Alexander is one of, if not the best cornerback in the league right now. And that's part of the reason why in week 1, if you remember all the way back to week 1, you all torched me because I had Adam Thielen listed as a sit. Why would we list him as a sit? Alexander was the reason why. I thought Alexander was going to be on Thielen in week 1. He wasn't. Alexander is probably going to be on Jefferson this week as Thielen gets moved around a little bit more and they get him away from Jefferson. And because of the way he lit them up in week 1, I'm going to go ahead and list him as a start while I put Justin Jefferson as a sit. Now, Justin Jefferson, the wide receiver 15 on the season. I know a lot of you are going to want to start him. If he's your only option and you're starting him as a wide receiver 3, okay, there's worse things that you could do with your lineup. But just keep in mind, if Alexander's on him, it's probably going to be a tough day. That ceiling's going to be really limited. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and list him as a sit because I think Alexander will be covering Jefferson more likely majority of the time in this game. For Green Bay, Devontae Adams, 100% a start for us. Coming off a huge game last week where he could not be stopped. MVS, Darius Shepard, both sits for me. MVS is just not consistent enough right now. Right now, the running backs, whether it be Jamal Williams or Aaron Jones, are kind of the number 2 target. Tanyan is getting some of that priority as the number 2B behind the running back target right now. MVS, always could have a big game, break one out here or there, but are you really wanting to start him? If you're starting MVS, your roster has a lot more problems than MVS. Indianapolis heads into Detroit this week, and maybe Everson Griffin will be joining them sooner rather than later. The Lions making a move, trying to be contenders at 3-3 this year. We'll see what happens with that. I'm not too sold on it as of yet, but good move for them. Only cost like a 6-round pick, so definitely a good one to start there. For the Indianapolis Colts, Marcus Johnson and T.Y. Hilton are both going to be listed as sits for me. Zach Pascal is going to be a start because Marcus Johnson and T.Y. Hilton likely on the outside with Pascal maybe roaming around in that slot a little bit more. And if he's in the slot, I think he's got a little bit more opportunity for success. But someone's going to need to help move the ball against Detroit, right? Someone's going to have to move the ball down the field. Indianapolis isn't going to go into Detroit and just run the football on them and control it. Detroit's offense, especially at home, will be able to do a little bit of damage themselves. So someone's going to have to score a touchdown probably this week. My bets are going to be on Zach Pascal doing that. For the Lions, Kenny Golladay is going to be a start for me. I'm going to have Marvin Jones listed as a start for the second straight week. Xavier Rhodes, okay? In the past, Marvin Jones has been pretty darn successful against Xavier Rhodes. He's got 4 touchdowns against him in his career. Is Xavier Rhodes going to be on Marvin Jones, or is he going to be on Kenny Golladay? Well, if he's on Kenny Golladay, that's only good for Marvin Jones in the sense that he's not having to face cornerback 1 coverage. Could end up being a big day. And if Xavier Rhodes is on Kenny Golladay, Stafford may not look his way nearly as much, giving an opportunity for Marvin Jones to have a big play again this week. But if Xavier Rhodes is on Marvin Jones has owned him in the past. So while the ceiling might be a little bit lower this week, we're gonna start Marvin Jones, because when you have a track record of success like that, you continue to roll with it more times than not. The Raiders. Don't ever do that again, Kyle. Going up against the Cleveland Browns this week, the Raiders offense is looking really good lately, man. Derek Carr, I tell you what, we've always been Derek Carr fans here at the Fantasy Headliners. People continue to trash him and not talk nearly enough about how good he has been. And, some of the issues that he's had in the past has been for a lack of weapons. And, he's got some guys around him this year finally. Henry Ruggs, Nelson Aguilar, both going to be starts for me this week. Why? Well, Cleveland allows the second most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And Henry Ruggs, a big play against Cleveland, is, well, highly likely. Highly being the key word there. Nelson Aguilar is going to be another start for me. He has a touchdown in 3 straight games, and he's kind of become that wide receiver 1 for Derek Carr. He's that number 1 target right now, looking his way quite a bit outside of Darren Waller, right? Darren Waller is going to be that number 1 target, but Nelson Aguilar has looked really, really good over the last 3 games, kind of coming into his own. Derek Carr doing something that, Carson Wentz could never do with Nelson Aguilar. I'm kidding. Philadelphia, I'm just giving you a hard time this week. All right, Eagles fans, calm down. Calm down. I'm just messing with you. So for Cleveland, no OBJ. So this offense is going to look a little bit different this week. Jarvis Landry and Rashard Higgins are both starts for me. Las Vegas is allowing almost 40 fantasy points a game to opposing wide receivers, and I do believe this is a game that hits the over. And if it hits the over, that means some of these wide receivers are going to have to do a little bit of work. So Landry and Higgins will both be starts for me. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I brought up Higgins and him in the waiver wire video this week. Just keep an eye on him. Let's see how he does over the next couple of weeks. I watched him for quite a few years at Michigan. Good athlete, lots of skills. Just never really broke out. But Michigan also hasn't really had a quarterback in quite some time that could get him the football either. So, maybe Baker Mayfield is that guy. Maybe Baker Mayfield is the guy to finally get him the football. We'll keep an eye on him. A sit this week, but he could be in for some big plays down the road. Tennessee and Cincinnati this week. In Tennessee, a close one last week. They're going to want to come out this week and get back in the win column. So I think they're going to try to put it on Cincinnati a little bit this week. Now, Corey Davis, AJ Brown, Adam Humphries all together on the field last week for the first time since week 1. I'm going with Corey Davis and AJ Brown to be starts this week. Going up against Cincinnati, they're going to be throwing it a little bit. They're going to, again, want to put it on Cincinnati. Going to want to get back into the win column. And because of that, I'm going with Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. Adam Humphries, to me, again, last week, first time they've all been on the field together since week 1. 3 targets, 1 reception, 19 yards. When you look at it, you've got A.J. Brown, and then Jonnu Smith, Corey Davis, Derrick Henry running the ball. So Adam Humphries kind of becomes like the 4th priority on that offense when all 3 of those wide receivers are healthy. So because of that this week, I'm just not interested in playing him. He's been a decent fill-in. I mean, he hasn't had some bad weeks in PPR leagues. He might have got you through as like a flex option, but there's not nearly enough upside with him if all these guys are on the field together. And Corey Davis this week, with Brown being on the field and really being that deep threat, it allows Corey Davis. It opens up a lot of opportunities for him. Back last week, looked good. Expect him to throw the ball around a little bit again this week. For Cincinnati, AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins are all going to be starts for me this week. These guys, Tennessee gives up quite a few fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Joe Burrow's on pace to throw it 1,567 times this year. That's an exaggeration, but it feels like it. And because he's throwing it so much, it allows all 3 of these guys to be starts every single week. So I'm going to list them all 3 as starts. Higgins continues to look good. Boyd's really still the wide receiver 1 in that offense right now. AJ Green, though, after having a rough start to the season, has really been involved the last couple of weeks. Expect him to continue to be involved moving forward, especially if Cincinnati is going to be throwing it so much. New England gets to go up against Buffalo this week. That's it. That's all I really have to say about New England. Are we going to be playing any of these guys? No, that offense looks absolutely awful right now. Cam Newton's not his former self. He's just not on the same page with any of these guys. None of them look good out on the field. The Bills defense is tough. The Patriots couldn't even do anything against the 49ers, who have a ton of injuries. I mean, what else do you want me to say? If you're considering starting a Patriot this week, don't do it. That doesn't make any sense. Don't do it. Don't start a Patriot this week going up against Buffalo. On the flip side, though, we're going to go ahead and start Diggs and Cole Beasley this week. I mean, heck, Cole Beasley right now is the wide receiver 22 in half PPR formats, 11 receptions, 112 yards on 12 targets last week. Is John Brown going to be back this week? Stephon Diggs, even going up against Gilmore. I'm still going to pick Diggs' talent to win out every single time. I'm going to put him on the field. The Josh Allen-Diggs connection has just been too good this year. So Diggs, Beasley, both as starts for me this week. New England, again, you're just going to forget about him at this point. The Chargers and the Broncos and Justin Herbert. That's what I'm going to call him. It sounds fancy. Justin Herbert, the king of LA. That's what we're going to call him moving forward. Justin Herbert's looked so good over the last few weeks. It's hard not to like these wide receivers from the Los Angeles Chargers. And as much as I do like them, Mike Williams has to be a sit for me. No, Keenan Allen's going to be a start. He's the volume king. He's getting so many looks there. He's going to be a start every single week. There's an interesting development, though, with Mike Williams and Jalen Guyton. Jalen Guyton, while Mike Williams was out, was kind of that deep threat for the Los Angeles Chargers. All of a sudden, last week, he comes out and he steals one of those deep targets from Mike Williams. You know, if Mike Williams gets that deep target and scores, he's a start last week. But he didn't. It ended up being a start. So I want to see how this works out over the next couple of weeks. Is Guyton kind of becoming a little bit more of a deep threat there? Do we see all three of these guys on the field more times than not? Is Mike Williams going to continue to see those big plays? Just something I want to monitor going forward. So for right now, I'm going to end up sitting both of those guys just because it could be a little bit back and forth. And Herbert's been spreading the ball around like crazy. I mean, 2 tight ends last week scored touchdowns for the Chargers. Neither of them were named Hunter Henry, but we'll talk about that more on the tight end video. For Denver, I'm not going with any of these guys. Judy's a sit, Patrick a sit, Hamler a sit, Hamilton a sit. The Chargers allow the 10th fewest fantasy points per game. Locke just doesn't look like himself since coming back from the injury. Tough matchup, whatever it may be. I'm going to skip all these guys this week. I expect Noah Fant. I expect a lot of the run game. I don't expect much production from the wide receivers. San Francisco and Seattle will bring my Manscaped must start of the week to Brandon Ayuk. No Deebo Samuel this week, and he's going up against Seattle that allows the most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers by 12 points. So Seattle's defense continues to get shredded down the field, and more than likely Brandon Ayuk is going to be a guy that will be a start for me this week. Will definitely be in my top 30 with no Deebo Samuel and such a good matchup. And San Francisco is going to have to throw, right? There's no way that they're going to be able to play the Seattle Seahawks and not throw the ball, especially with all the injuries that they have at the running back position right now. So I'm going to go ahead and steer clear this week of everyone outside of Ayuk and Kendrick Bourne. And really, who is that? Who is that? Deebo Samuel being hurt. Who's going to be out there? But those two will end up being starts for me because San Francisco's, I mean, they're going to have to throw the ball if they want to keep up and be in this game and have a chance to win. For Seattle, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, both of these guys are going to end up being starts for me this week. You know, last week with DK Metcalf, not the greatest week in the world, but you're going to keep going back to him, right? He's been a top 10 wide receiver all year long. With Tyler Lockett, this is why you always start Tyler Lockett. You get super frustrated with him when he doesn't put up numbers, but then all of a sudden the guy, boom, huge week, right? And when do you wreak single-handedly? And that's what he did last week. And that's why you always start him. And that's why he'll be a start again. But don't forget, Brandon Ayuk is my Manscaped must start of the week. If you go to manscaped.com, you can get 20% off any of their products with code word headliners, all capital letters. Head over to manscaped.com and use that up. Man, I am not feeling New Orleans this week. Is Michael Thomas going to play? If he does, is he 100%? Is Emmanuel Sanders going to be cleared to come back? If he does, is he 100%? Traquan Smith. You know, he's looked good at times this year, but this is a tough matchup. Deontay Harris, Marquez Callaway. There's not a whole lot of upside for me in this matchup. And honestly, I'm avoiding everyone from New Orleans this week, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense going up against Chicago. But Chicago's offense hasn't been that great either. So is New Orleans really going to have to throw the ball all over the place? They could use Alvin Kamara, they could use Latavius Murray and really try to run against this team and just keep the ball away from them. Worry about just winning the game on the ground. If they do that, obviously Jared Cook could see a little bit as well. Going up against Chicago, for the Chicago Bears, Allen Robinson he hasn't been exciting this year by any means, but he's been safe. He's doing his job. He's getting receptions and he's getting some yards. The upside really hasn't been there, but I talked about it this offseason as well, that the upside wasn't there last year. He was just super consistent. He just got yards and catches, and that's why he was so good. For Anthony Miller and Darnell Mooney, both of those guys are going to be sits. But again, Allen Robinson, even though he's not a guy that's been lighting it up every single week, he's doing more than enough to be in your lineup. Dallas and Philadelphia, and Andy Dalton hasn't necessarily been ruled out for this week yet, but if he is, they're going to be going with a third string quarterback. And even with that being said, I'm still going back to Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. The Philly pass defense is not great. Washington last week that held Dallas in check. No one talks about it, but they have allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers this season. They've actually done a really good job. Everyone last week blamed it on Dallas. Nobody gave Washington credit last week, and not really a lot of people are on the defensive side of the ball so far. But they've done that all season against wide receivers. They're going to have to, Philly's pass defense is nothing compared to what Washington's has been. So, yes, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, they're going to be starts for me because you know what? They're going to have to throw the ball. I don't think that they're just going to be able to run the ball with Ezekiel Elliott all game long. Yeah, the offense isn't firing on all cylinders, but something's going to have to happen. Going up against Philadelphia, they got to get a win, and you go to your best weapons. And that's why Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb are going to be starts for me this week. For Philadelphia, though, right now I've got Greg Ward and Travis Fulgham as starts. Okay. Dallas allows the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Again, another reason why I'm probably going to have to throw the ball for Dallas. I've got Lamb and Cooper as starts. Jalen Reagor, I want to start him. If you've been, if you've been subscribed to the Fantasy Headliner since the offseason, you know how I feel about Jalen Reagor. Okay. Absolutely love him. I got to see him back, though. I got to see him healthy. Will he play this week? Maybe they don't. He's off IR, but maybe they don't play him this week. Maybe he needs another week. We'll see how he does in practice. But for me, Ward and Fulgham will be not enough of a start this week because they're going to have to throw the ball. There's at least 4 wide receivers in this matchup that could see anywhere between 5 and 7 receptions, between 70 and 100 yards. Just wondering who it goes to, but there's going to be plenty of passing attempts in this game for these wide receivers to hit. Last game, Monday Night Football, Tampa Bay and the New York Giants. Mike Evans with no Chris Godwin. Mike Evans is a start this week. Evans always balls out when Godwin is not in. And if Bradbury is on Evans, honestly, I'm not even that worried about it this week. Again, Evans, when Godwin is not in the lineup, Evans does more than enough. For Scotty Miller, okay, I'm going to list him as a start after a big game last week. He's caught us in this position a couple of times already this season. Has a good game, disappears the next. But if Bradbury is on Evans, okay, even though I think the touchdown is there, even though I think there's enough to list him as a start, Scotty Miller could still see a little bit more from Tom Brady this week if Bradbury is over on Evans, which more than likely will be the case. For the New York Giants, I'm going to list everyone as a sit. It's a tough matchup. It's tough to read what's going to happen with this offense moving forward. Darius Slayton's been up and down. Sterling Shepard back last week. But what's going to happen with him? Is he going to continue to be the number 1 target? Golden Tate, Austin Mack, all these guys are sits for me. Daniel Jones isn't just playing that well right now. And this is a tough matchup. There's just not enough upside for me to want to play any of these guys. I want to play Darius Slayton. I really do. But is he going to be the guy? With Shepard back and Shepard getting a little bit more looks last week, does that continue to be the case moving forward? Do they go back to Slayton next week? Is this going to be one of those teams where it's a toss-up every single week between who's going to be the wide receiver 1? I got to see it. And until I see it, I got to be careful with it. They're all sits. There you have it, Headliner Nation, my start and sit for wide receivers here in Week 8. Like the video if you appreciate the content. Leave a comment below if you've got any questions about any of the wide receivers. And as always, if you're new to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button and become a part of Headliner Nation today. Now over 110,000 strong. here on YouTube. Appreciate it, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.